Good evening and welcome to the Dusty Feet. You're going to notice the camera's a little skewed, and that's because on days like this, I have a guest, and I'm always excited to have guests. So you're going to get to enjoy the guest part of this as we continue our homework series. That said, let's get to those little housekeeping things. DustyFeet.com. That's where you're going to get the previous videos, live links to this video, and then collections of each of the series. The white lettering across the top is the homework series. When you go to the webpage, you'll see that. And then I'm using Twitter to put updates. And so as I get guests and things become more regular and we get this up, you're going to get, if you got to today's Twitter, you'd have said that you'll know who our guest is. So I think that's pretty cool. So we're in the homework series. This is part 7, Jesus and Sexual Desire. Not the normal stuff you're going to get on a Sunday pulpit conversation, probably. However, it's from the same scripture that should be coming from that pulpit all the time, and that's a churchianity side of things, because if you've listened to the video, you will know that Song of Solomon is read in synagogue. And if you don't understand that, go read Song of Solomon and you'll get a hint. It's one of those fun things. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation, where beliefs, understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So here we go on the Dusty Feet. And there's my guest. So, and we've cheated, right? So we have our names,
in case you get confused.
Yeah. Who's who? Because we look so much alike that you often confuse the two of us. People go, are you? Both of us, those that know us, know we're John Wern's kids. I think that's, if you know my dad, and then you meet us, you go, yeah, you're John's kids. So,
oh yeah.
And I love being John Wern's son.
I can't tell you how many times I say something and my wife says, "Okay, John."
She knows. Oh my gosh. I did. Heather had we played something. It was a video or something I did. And I said, that's my dad. That's my dad. It was a video of, when we were on the cruise, that one where we got stuck out on the ship for an extra 4 days. And we did a live thing just before the ship took off. And the isms and mannerisms and how I said, oh my gosh, there's my dad. But when we were young, Dad was known as Bob's dad. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily good, because in school, that would be because the office knew you and you were,
well, you're
Bob's
Robert's
kid.
father. Yes.
Robert, that's right. You were Robert's father. Please come to the office.
Yes.
Have that conversation, And it's bad enough when part of the staff, the counselor and the principals, were all part of Dad's Sunday school or involved enough in church where, that didn't really help at all either. Yeah. Did you ever get that you were Bob's brother at LAB?
Yeah, LAB. Because we crossed over there just 1 year, didn't we?
No,
Was it 2 years?
No, maybe just a year.
Because I remember being on the quad, the main quad, and we were fighting, and I can't remember. I want to say, I was on top, beating on you,
right?
And
so this is probably true.
Grabbed me and picked me up and said, "Get off your brother," because we were fighting. But yes, I remember walking into classrooms and saying, "Oh yeah, you're Bob's brother.
You're Bob's brother." And to be fair to you, in years past there, you by far earned your keep. You eclipsed my shadow on there many times over.
Well,
So
wasn't hard.
thank you for bringing some of that better part to the word name at
Yeah.
LAB, because Dad pulled me out of LAB because I decided to push him on grades, and he said, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't get at least this, then I'm not going to pay. So I
Right.
decided on a few classes I wouldn't do that, and
We
Dad,
found out he said
there's
what he
no poker,
meant he
no
said.
bluff. Dad went, yeah, straight to Chatsworth High, public high school. Welcome
Mm-hmm.
to High School 101, of which I guess that was a motivation for me because I ended up graduating early.
Yeah.
LAB helped set me up with the education system they gave me and the classes I got to take, but I graduated a year early because I didn't want to be there. So I took all the classes you could take, took that California State proficiency exam that they
Mm-hmm. I
offered to
remember
say,
that.
can you get out? And yeah, I got out early. So on that fun stuff. This has nothing to do with tonight's
Of
episode,
course
mind
not.
you. So not at all. Okay. So tonight's episode is Jesus and sexual desire. And this is a subject that's near and how do you say this nicely? Near and dear to our hearts. I don't know if that's always a
Mm-hmm.
good thing, but a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and uh, and so that I was thrilled that Jimmy decided to pop out and do this, and so thanks, because this will be cool. So we have two clips. One we'll play will be basically the beginning, the intro to the deal, but I think Mackie sets the stage. A lot of times in his videos at the end he'll say, let's land the plane. It's one
Right.
of his things that he likes to do this. So in this one I'm going to say, buckle up, ready for takeoff, because we're going to use this for takeoff, and then we'll talk. And then we got that one little clip that's really a bite towards the end of the clip. This said, if you are watching this and not live, then hit pause, link in the description, go listen to the video first, please. Okay, because that's the direction we're coming from and talking about,
Yeah.
and Mackie's comments that are part of it. For those of you live and you haven't watched it, shame on you because you had homework. That's why it's a homework series. But if you haven't, hopefully you'll see some connections, and we'll talk the way we talk when we do things. So that said, let's play the first audio.
Matthew 5, verse 27. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell.
All right. Hey, everybody. How you guys doing? I always mean it. I really mean it. Not just to 10 of you, because there's more than 10 of us here. Welcome. Good to have you guys here. Welcome to Door of Hope. If you're visiting or whatever, even if you're not visiting, you're here. So here we are. It's good to be here with you guys. Jesus is rather intense, isn't he? Yeah, self-mutilation and the whole deal. Wow. So let's, big picture here. We have three or four sentences that are going to be our focus today. But big picture, because the meaning of four sentences changes dramatically depending on all of the other sentences that are around them, right? So the big picture is that we're in Matthew. Jesus has been announcing the arrival of the kingdom, of the rule and the reign of God, and that's the whole story of how God is reclaiming his world from what we have done to the place and to each other here. And so in Jesus, there's a new rule, a new reign, and a new humanity that Jesus is starting around himself. And so he's calling these followers to himself. He's shaping this new environment that he calls the kingdom of all these upside down values and so on. And so he calls these people to himself, and he is right now in these sentences here, we're kind of in a 6-part little series here within the first great block of his teaching on the kingdom. So we call it the Sermon on the Mount. Traditionally, Matthew in chapter 4 called it Jesus teaching the good news of the kingdom, and then chapters 5, 6, and 7 come. So this is Jesus announcing the kingdom and what life in the kingdom looks like when his disciples actually follow him and rediscover their humanity. And we're in a 6-part section of it where Jesus is filling out something that he said, because he quoted from the scriptures. He said, I here as a rabbi and a teacher, and I'm not here to undermine or set aside Israel's scriptures, right? What they called the law and the prophets, or the Torah. He says, I'm not here to set them aside or to undermine them. What I'm here to do is to create a people of the kingdom in whom the purpose of all of God's commands come into their fulfillment. And so he quotes from the Old Testament scriptures, from the laws specifically, about like the famous 10 Commandments. That's what he's doing right here. And he says, you've heard that this was said, but I say to you. And then he lays down his new teaching, not as a rejection, not even as an explanation, but as a new teaching that calls his disciples to something that's even more radical, right, than the original command even did. And in this way, the command is fulfilled. And so last week, it was about anger and forgiveness, and today we're exploring Jesus' teaching on sex, sexual desire. Next week, marriage and divorce. So nothing substantial. Here, nothing intimidating, right, to talk about in a city like ours. So let me just kind of actually head this off at the pass here and just name something. I said a few weeks ago, these are the sections of Jesus' teaching where he will be really getting into our business personally, right? And when these topics of sex and marriage and Jesus' teaching comes up, I expect that over the next few Sundays, there's going to be an enormous amount of discussion, of debate, of controversy, conversation, and I think that's a good thing. That's a really good thing, because we're moving towards what Jesus is saying, and we're engaging with it, and we're letting him challenge us. But I want to name something that's going to be happening, right, in our gatherings over the next few Sundays here as we move at this. And it has to do with the lots of different kinds of people who are around Door of Hope. So we have a whole bunch of us who we would call ourselves disciples of Jesus. I'm trying to follow Jesus. I look to him, reckon with who he is, what he said, what he did. It's for me. I'm going to follow him. And so his teachings are hard and they're difficult, but you're all in. There are others of us who we grew up around what I call churchianity, which is just kind of a general religiosity kind of upbringing, and it's legalistic or it's shallow, and there's always bad music, right? And so there's that. And so some of us grew up around that. You bailed on that, but now, as a young adult or an adult, you're coming back and you're rediscovering Jesus in this whole new way and for yourself as an adult, not a part of your family or whatever. And so there's a whole bunch of us who'd fit into that. And the way Christians make a big deal out of sex and marriage and all that kind of stuff has always been difficult for you, and what's the big deal? There's quite a number of us who we did not grow up around churchianity at all, and so you're all in for Jesus, and you're discovering, and you're really processing Jesus' teachings for the first time, really ever, in your life. And then there's it's a smaller group, but there are a number of people among us who they wouldn't even identify themselves as Christians, but their friends dragged them here, whatever, or family members, or you're genuinely interested, you're exploring, but, and the way Christians and sex and media, holy cow, you're just, what a deal. So we're all here we are. And we're looking at some of the most difficult teachings of Jesus about some of the most personal issues that are also controversial in our culture. And so let me just kind of frame, at least what for me is a helpful way to frame this. Jesus is saying these words to his disciples. He's talking to people who have reckoned with who he is and have chosen to let who he is be true for them, let their identity be shaped by following him, and they're in, right? And so if that's not you, right? If you wouldn't call yourself a Christian or a disciple of Jesus, there's a sense in which you actually aren't really the primary audience that's being addressed in Jesus' words or in these messages even. And this, I think, raises at least an important issue, at least for me, is that I think one of the problems or missteps that the church, at least in our setting in Western culture in America, has taken is by making the issues of a Christian view of sex or marriage, making that the front burner issue, and making that the issue that we actually have the first conversations with somebody who's not a disciple of Jesus. And it just seems to me that that's kind of like horse, cart, a cart before the horse kind of deal. Because if someone's not a disciple of Jesus, why on earth should they be compelled to follow his teachings when it comes to any arena of life, much less marriage or sexuality? So if you're not a Christian, I just invite you to overhear what Jesus is saying to his disciples. But I want to encourage you, I think the most important issue for you to be thinking about is not sex or marriage, it's Jesus and who he is and what he did and what he said and what you're going to do about that. And once you're there, then all of life comes under the microscope of Jesus' teaching, so to speak. Does that make any sense? Okay, so that's my little caveat. Jesus makes us all uncomfortable, though. So let's just say that. Let's just dive in and explore the implications.
Okay, there we go. That's exactly it. So, okay, so all of that said, one, I think it's fair to say to anybody even watching this is, which audience are you part of when he's talking to when Mackie's talking to his part of the deal, is that understand when we're talking about us is that we're coming from an all-in perspective. Right. So, and anything we say is not driven to point at you going, what it is, we're pointing at ourselves.
Right.
And the fair thing to say is, if you're not seeing me do it, we have another discussion, and a fair discussion. And that's the problem that Jesus had, for instance, with the Pharisees. It wasn't what they were saying, it was what they were doing, the hypocritical side of the equation. Same thing with us. That I'm not talking about this mystical list of things to do or don't do, but how do we manage that outside? So, yeah. So what hit you on this?
I think listening to him, I mean, when you listen to the whole thing, it's really, I mean, probably one of the best talks I've ever heard on sexuality in the church.
Yeah, it's scary good. Yeah.
Yeah. Pastors can get very preachy. Pastors can get very heady, or they can get very legalistic.
Right.
And it's rare that you find someone who doesn't do that and yet still adheres to what Jesus is saying and right. Asking of us.
Right. Yeah.
But what I liked that he said was the whole area of clarifying, defining who are we talking to,
right.
And helping us to understand that this topic is not the topic that we sit down and discuss with somebody who's just now showing some curiosity with regard to Christianity, because they're right. not going to get it. It's going right. to look too radical.
Right. Yep.
And that's unfortunate because, like you said, so many times people, that's the first thing they talk about, and address. It's funny. I'm watching, Don and I are binge watching West Wing. And okay. So we've been, it's whatever, 8 seasons, and
it's so well written.
Oh gosh,
that is Rabbi Foreman's favorite series.
Oh really? Oh,
yeah, that's the irony. I'm chuckling at that because he loves the writing and how the characters interact and yada yada. Yeah. He loves West Wing, which I thought was really funny. You say that, I'm not shocked by that. So, but go on. Sorry.
Well, and again, it is the writing that makes it amazing, and Sorkin did a great job of it. He did an even better job later on in some of his later work. But in here, this was the first time my eyes were opened up to the fact, having grown up very conservative Republican, that Democrats could actually be Christians. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Are you serious? Because I was taught, differently. But in the series, All of the issues, especially in political races and candidates, dialogue and language, it's often, they'll ask the question, do you believe in abortion? Do you believe in same-sex marriage? And those issues are brought up to the candidates who are believers. And it's like, that's almost an unfair thing to talk about, because you're talking about belief, versus, a political
platform
position. Yeah. Platform.
Position,
there you
platform,
go.
yeah.
And this last episode that we watched last night, he was talking about clarifying the difference. He was talking about evolution versus creation. And he said he believed in intelligent design, and he believed in God, but he didn't believe that it should be taught in schools, because schools are about science. And the intelligent design cannot be scientifically proved. Now, there are others who would argue that.
Right. Right. But that's the point he's making in this series, and making that point.
Exactly.
Right.
And he said, pursue your beliefs and teach your beliefs, but outside the context of the school system, kind of thing. And so, what Mackie was talking about is, let's not have those conversations like that with someone who doesn't understand the other side of it, where we're coming in from. As he put in there later on, I think he talked about it, the first 2 pages of scripture,
Right. Yeah. He mentions it. Yeah. The first, yeah.
What that means. So, yeah.
No, and that's, you bring up a really good point with that, because in those discussion points, and you have to realize the context that you're going to grab it in, you're going to take it into. Now, you and I are involved in a clubhouse. We're both on Clubhouse, and there's a one of the rooms that we visit talks about this from there, and I'm agreeing with you, is that you're thinking that your religiosity is tied to some political party. And I think the church, in the last 2 elections, and I'd argue further back, but would just be fresh on that, have done more to damage God's reputation than anything.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. And so when you start blurring these in, it brings these challenges. So in that context, now you have somebody in a church context, but not church like we grew up in at Van Nuys Baptist, right? Where Mackie is going, look, it's like Foreman when they go and he's digging into Torah, and he's going, look, we have Zondervan's bookstore. They call it Talmud. For church, it's Zondervan's bookstore. There is no difference, okay? And when he's talking, and he said, we need to get back to Scripture. And he's heavy on the first couple pages. He's huge on those, and it's great. And Mackie is the same way, that we need to get back to the Scripture and what it is. And that means we need to talk about these things. And in this particular one, it's this sexual desire scenario, and when he talks about that it's a good thing. Remember, he said this is a good thing. This is a first couple pages of your Bible answer. This is good.
Yeah.
The fact that we've flipped it is our bad, not its bad, right? It's not its fault, right? I'm doing a study on the Hebrew side of certain text as they're translated, okay? And they'll have words that in English, in other words, when you look at the English translation, they go with the one that's comfortable. In particular, let's say Cain and Abel. And there's the verse when God goes and questions Cain, and then he says, the blood of Abel's cries from the ground, right? The blood cries from the ground, okay? The Hebrew is bloods. It's plural. It's plural. So Skip Moen goes in there digging in, and Skip goes in and goes to the etymology of the words, that kind of stuff, and goes in. He says, that is a genocidal term. In other words, what you did is everything that was supposed to come from Abel ceased to exist
Right.
So murder is now a community thing because you have stopped everything.
Yeah, you're right. A generational.
And that's just one generation. Picture the generations that tie from that.
Yeah.
And that was stopped. What if mom didn't have me?
Right.
Then doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So those are those things where we go, what are those deals? Now, so in one of them, one of those things that you see in the terms in the Tanakh especially is desire. Okay. And when it's negative, it'll say desire, desire. There'll be like double words because, and the rabbis have pulled up to desire, desire. In other words, it's not to like something is fine. To desire good fruit, to desire your wife, those are good things. To desire God, but to desire now takes you to the selfish aspect.
Right.
Okay,
that's the lust. Exactly.
That's it. That's where I'm going to segue. Exactly right there. Lust is desire. It's not the where Mackie was talking about looking at somebody that's pretty,
right,
and acknowledging they're beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, and you go, "Thank you, God, you're beautiful." End of story, right? But as soon as that, and he's comes from the male perspective because he's a guy, but also in that setup to say now when you take that and you stretch that scenario out,
right,
now we start crossing that border. He mentions something. Mackie mentioned what he where did I put it? This is a more radical thought, right? And a more deal. And we've heard this. Sometimes in church they'll say the phrase like raising the bar, right? And part of me goes, you already said that traditional churchianity will tell you that you can't do the law, right? And then you say Jesus made it higher. So, it's like church's own doctrine has a problem with itself, okay, based on that thought process. And you go, oh my gosh. And yet we swallowed hook and sinker for a long time. So I figured, I thought about something that, let's say Jesus, this is a thought to be discussed, okay? Let's say Jesus in this scenario is coming out and saying, okay, you've had this for 2,000, you've had this literally for thousands of years before he comes up. He's going, okay, I expect more mature behavior from it. So if it's now more mature, I'm saying now we need to go from the don't to the do. When you're teaching a little kid, you tell them a lot. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's talking to an immature. I manage you on the don'ts. So if I go back and look at Torah, for instance, and I examine the don'ts to the do's, now I get into what Jesus is saying. Because when Jesus says, look, like we were talking about anger and hate, where he goes, look, it's not bad enough to not murder somebody. Don't hate them, right? And that is a maturity scenario. To say the immature guy goes, I didn't kill anybody today, so I'm good. Okay? And the mature, so the same question. He says, I didn't commit adultery today. I didn't sleep with anybody today. I like Mackie where he goes, and for some people, that's a big thing. That's a big thing to not do that. And you go, good for you. And I'm happy, right? But it's an immature thought. The mature thought is, have I not done the other thing? And that is not, so like Jesus calling us to eat, look, you had the manna. You had look, I literally fed you, watered you, and made sure your clothes did not expire. And you left with enough to have this, and they survived on that for 40 years. Okay? So God does this. That's what you do with children. And they're children, and they get it. I would say by the time they're ready to go into the land after those 40 years, I'd equate them to maybe a teenager where they can say, yeah, we can do this. Where Joshua and Caleb are a little more mature, and the group that's with them, and they go back and look and say, hey, we can do this. And God says, okay, now you think you know it. He says, don't forget where it came from. That's like you go out and hit the world, and your parents remind you, don't forget who helped you get there. Right? Which goes back to honoring your parents. There's so many layers to this on this setup. So Jesus is asking for another level of maturity in this. And when he's asking for this level of maturity in this sexual desire says, and then he goes and he tags us men in it because it's our problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they expect us more. So now I would then put out, based on what I just said, then fulfillment would be, how do you do it versus not do it? In other words, like not committing adultery. How do I do it? By not lusting after something. So how do I walk that walk and do that?
Right.
That's a different deal. So it's not that doesn't count anymore. It's how do I do it now?
Yeah.
By not. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, if you were to look at Jesus's ultimate goal, it's not just change the behavior, don't sleep with other people.
Right.
It's honestly not just don't think of other people in a wrong way.
Right.
His is fill your mind with the stuff that's so good you don't even want that.
Right.
But what I like about what Jesus does is, yes, ideally that's what we want. I was reading Romans 12 this morning, and he was talking about, renewing your mind and transforming the way you think.
Think on these things. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what we want to do, but we still have that, we're still in the world, and we still have the world of flesh and the devil that we have to deal with.
Right.
And so how do we do that well? And, you were talking about it just a second ago, and yes, there's beauty in the world, and there's nothing wrong with beauty in the world, and seeing beauty in the world and recognizing it and going, yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you, God, for creating such a beautiful person.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at Freedom in Christ, and, Neil was talking about, the thoughts in our heads, and you drive down the street and you see billboards all over the place.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's ads on the computer, that pop up everywhere, of, women dressed, lustfully kind of thing. And, just to look at it and go, that's a lie, and then go on, acknowledging that is not a true depiction of what the reality is.
Yeah. The creator's intent is on that.
Yeah. Exactly. That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
And so that then helps us get our mind back on track with, what is the right thing to do? Well, to think on the things that are beautiful in God's eyes.
There you go.
And so that to me is where Jesus, I think, was moving us.
And that again is a maturity thought. It's not a like Torah is elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get to junior high and high school without elementary school. That's, in my opinion. This is Bob's opinion, and I'm not going to throw you under the bus on that. Those are Bob's opinion is that is elementary school. So if I can get elementary school, then I can start to understand. Because if you get to and I would think it's interesting if you took somebody that was, say, homeschooled, okay, and then they go to junior high or high school, and there's an expectation of what you would know based on the walking up of the school system. You get to there and you didn't have that core understanding, teacher's going to have a problem. We do address that when it comes to college. When you go to college, unless you've taken college prep classes, you're going to take an entrance test.
Right.
Unless your SAT scores were such that you were you got scholarships in, which they already know that point because from the SATs, still a test, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this one, you're going to take an entrance exam, and if you do well, you can sometimes go to 201 courses. You don't need to take 101s. Generally speaking, people start at 101s. Sometimes you'll take the placement course and they'll go, I think we want to take a few 100 courses first. We're going to review English and algebra just to
Back to the basics.
get you ready for that before you get to the college level stuff, because
Right.
there is an expectation from there. When the teacher walks in the class, and if you, especially if you're taking a series course, when you get to 301 and 401, there's a good chance a teacher's seen you at 101 and 201. So you have to know this going forward. And I think we've done ourselves a disservice with this. And in that, it screws us up.
Yeah.
And if we had a better core setup, we do that. That said, to say that you ingrained yourself so much in the elementary school of, look, if I only don't do this, I'm good.
Right.
That maturity doesn't get you to act responsibly in junior high and high school.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Which is why certain communities get so isolated, because they go, I'll pull out because I can't connect at that level to do that. And I can't operate at a mature level. I'm still in the don't touch, don't do, don't deal stage, and deal with the maturity of the other one. So I do believe Jesus calls us to be more mature. And to a fair statement, I would segue and go, gee, somebody else said that and coined the phrase, and Paul was really big on that particular part. Okay, we're past the milk. And understand, it's not like he'd been in for he'd been in for a number of years, but it's not like the intention of his audience was like, look, you've been doing this, okay, but I think they have. We know this. We shouldn't be at the milk stage. We should be at the meat stage. We need to be more mature in our thinking about this and women, and how to treat them properly, how to have the right mental attitude towards that is huge. And we messed that up.
And I think there's ways that as a church we can help people along that developmental stage, or those developmental stages. We tend to want to make everybody who walks in the front door of the church adhere to the highest level or highest standard that, God sets out there, and so they hear you need to cut off your hand and you're like, I don't think I want this. Yeah. But I remember, you and I talked about possibly down the road in maybe one of our Renew series things, going more into our own stories.
That's what I'd like us to do. Yeah.
But I remember sitting in recovery groups and hearing guys talk about, walking into the group and saying, hi, I'm, 20 days sober, 100 days sober, 5 years sober, to go, I'm about 15 minutes sober, and you're going, whoa, that was really raw, in saying that, you're being honest, but the group then affirming the fact that he was there.
Right.
Saying I'm here and I want to be different. And then,
or I wouldn't be here.
Them. Right. Exactly.
I wouldn't be here. I'd still be out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then to say, that's a great step. And those recovery programs use a reward system to kind of encourage them to go, let's take it another step further and a little bit deeper and a little bit more commitment and a little more sacrifice to what, we have been allowing ourselves to participate in.
Right.
And then we can get to that place where that now isn't an issue like it was before.
Right.
And that's what Jesus is talking about, is saying, it used to be like this, but if you want to get to the place where I want you to be, which is it not even being a thought or a desire, then the next step is how to grab it here.
Right.
Before it gets to here.
Right. Right.
Kind of
and
thing.
The expectation in the kingdom is just that. In other words, he is launching the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so basically you can have the little snippet that says, when I come back, this is how it's going to operate. Because if I would take these 5, 6, and 7 in Matthew and go, how what do you think when Yeshua, when Jesus returns, Mount of Olives, comes back, does the deal? I think how we think it's going to play out, I don't think we have a clue.
Yeah,
but let's just go with whatever plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's there. He's going to go, oh, by the way, I have a manual for that. And y'all have it. So I expect you to bring out your tablet or your or your scroll or your book, and we're going to talk about it. And then there will be those, I think, that are our 101s, 201s in the scenario. And I do believe that a lot of us will be 100s, in going, okay, let's go back and start at the beginning at the beginning, Genesis chapter 1:1, and go there and figure out what was good in God's eyes as we do this. So that said, because of good timing, let's play this. It's 5 minutes. So,
okay.
But I think it's a worthwhile clip to listen to, and we'll hit to it. So here we go with part 2.
Men as well. What is Jesus doing? He's addressing a huge group of men and women who are his disciples, but he addresses men. Why does he do that? Does he think that women never have inappropriate sexual desires? So I don't think Jesus is that stupid, right? What's he doing right here? And I think it's very intentional and it's profound, because the movie that we generate that men generate in their heads when they perpetuate the gaze and the stare. For some, it stays a private, internal matter. But I don't even need to tell the stories. I mean, just in the history of the human race, which gender has turned sexual desire into a tool of violence, subjugation, and oppression of the other gender? Do we need to take a vote on that, right? And this is why Jesus, he's not just teaching individual morality here. What's he doing? He's launching the kingdom. He's inaugurating a new humanity, an alternate society, and he challenges the men who live in this kingdom that if we really want to follow Jesus, we need to let him work on this area of our heart so that the kingdom is a place that is safe for women. Like what other implication is there of verse 28? He addresses men in the kingdom, and he says, in this kingdom, women are safe. They need to be safe from being victimized by the gaze and being treated by less than what they are, image-bearing human beings. It's very profound. And Jesus clearly thinks it's a huge, huge issue. How you guys doing? Some of us are feeling really horrible about ourselves right now. And that's not the worst thing in the world, as long as it's not the end of the story. And with Jesus, it's never the end of the story. Let's consider his response. If it's your right eye that's the problem, get rid of it. Gouge it out, throw it away. Better to lose one part of your body than for the whole to be thrown into hell. Your right hand, get rid of that thing. It's better to lose that body part than for the whole body to go into hell. Okay, all resolved? Here we go. Okay, so this is typical of Jesus. He will use shocking, attention-getting images that jolt you awake, and half of this is surely to just get us to say, dude, this is so serious, you don't even know how serious this is. Is Jesus actually commending self-mutilation as a way forward here, right? And I think if we could have him in a chair, we would ask him questions, and he would ask a whole bunch at us and never answer our question, right? That's kind of how he usually operates. But let's say he would cooperate or whatever, we could really ask him what he thought. I think, in my mind, I think it's clear that self-mutilation is not a legitimate resolution to this issue. Where is the core issue? He already said, where's the core issue? In the heart. Does he actually think tearing out your right eye, that right eye, that's really the problem? This is ridiculous, right? And so that right hand, or whatever. So he's using right as this image of the predominant amount of human beings right-handed and so on. I actually think he's just poetically matching the eye to the hand. But the eye, the hand, and the foot in the Psalms and in the Proverbs of Israel's scriptures, they're images of how you see the world, how you act in the world, and your life path in the world. And so if there is something in your life that seems indispensable to you. It seems like it's actually a part of you. And it brings pleasure. It makes things work. Our hands are extremely useful. We do most of our things with our hands and seeing with our eyes, however. But if there is something so closely, you think it's so closely woven into your being and how you live in the world, but it's ruining you, it's destroying you by constantly leading you into ruin in this area of your heart and sexual desire, Jesus says, get rid of that thing. Swift, decisive, don't think a second time about it. Get rid of that thing. Kill it dead. Gone. Don't mess with this. It'll consume you. It's a monster that will eat you alive. Sexual desire is not bad, but when it is not in the safe environment that creates and generates life, it's a monster that will consume you whole, and it will ruin all of your relationships. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about here.
It's an interesting part because this is kind of a challenge thought process, but if this is such a problem from a corruption side, meaning I think that the adversary has helped make this a corruptive issue where I believe we have more choices, and in those choices, the more choice you give us, the more opportunity we have to make wrong choices. But in that decision process stuff, that in those choices, that it must be really good if you're going to make it that. Okay. I would argue that, say, abortion is a subtle way. You're like, well, like, I can't get them to kill each other, but I can get genocide by stopping everything that goes forward from happening. When Skip Moen talked about this, and he brought up that particular point and was talking about it, he said, toss that into the abortion argument and see where it goes in that discussion. That you're not talking a child, you're talking genocide, a entire lineage of stuff. And so I think that's the subtle take on God and life, and being a God of life, and saying, I can get him before that, and I can make sure that genocide happens in a sad way. So as important as that is, just like it's interesting because I think if you really looked into each of the Big Ten in that, that's what you'd see. The attacks that are all in there are all based to address those core foundational issues that are part of your understanding of the kingdom and corrupting them. And we have this problem. And with this in particular one, with it said adultery, so it's great.
Yeah.
I expect mature behavior now. You're not children. You're not in the wilderness. You're not the deal. You've had this the whole time. You've got it. I expect better behavior. And then in that, love.
Which should be the ultimate driving force for all of it, and should change both our behavior to move away from the thing that sucks that away and move toward the thing that ultimately satisfies and brings community and union.
Right.
And I think that's one of the enemy's ways of dealing with it is he uses misdirection, and he uses this overdeveloped sense of or overindulgence in whatever it is. Because again, sexual desire is not bad.
Right.
But when you start desiring the desire, that's when it becomes more. And Jesus was, and what I loved about what Mackie was saying was Jesus was using very vivid imagery for them. And I wonder, because I mean, today we have television and media, you know, and we are saturated with images that mute our sensitivity toward or dull our sensitivity toward language, sexuality, those kinds of things.
Right.
Back then, he was trying to create an image in their minds of how serious he was trying to be, and he used that a lot. He used that when he was talking about, you might be asked to leave your father and mother, or your family, walk away from your family to follow me. And it's like, is he saying that families aren't important? No, he wasn't saying families aren't important. but there's sacrifice involved. And what is the, the degree to which that is?
Right.
I had thought of another one earlier that another image. Oh, when he was talking to, what was it when he was talking about, John 3, when he was talking about being born again, and the whole thing of you need to go back into your mother's womb. And they're like, okay, that's just weird. But again, it was trying to get them to think outside the box and what he was really trying to come at. And so he would use these strong images. And I think here he was doing the same thing, use this strong image to talk about how significant it is when he's talking about intimacy.
Yes.
And how important that is in understanding our relationship with God, and the fidelity of it. I don't want to openly have this, affair in my marriage to destroy it. And God is saying, here's the image. I want you to have that same commitment to me.
To me and the kingdom. Right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. And I'll say the ultimate step that Jesus is making in those statements, the one statement that he gives that pushes, because I think people have the misnomer that these 12 disciples were the ones that followed him, not realizing that truthfully there were 70 that followed him all the way until the end. And I'm not unconvinced that after his resurrection, that council of 70 that existed in Jerusalem were comprised with a lot of the people that were there before, right? But one of the things that scared them the most was just like you were saying about how these things are da-da-da. And then he goes, eat my flesh, drink my blood. Again, these images that are shocking. That's going. So, what is that level? Is he talking about cannibalism? No. Being a vampire? No. But this is exactly your point. Is that he does these shocking discussions to bring you into how important, how intense, how intimate these particular issues are with this, and you see it with this and that. And it's interesting because biblically it says hell, which is fun. And then we have the whole picture we have of hell. When you go back then, rabbinically, they were just starting to toy with that idea, rabbinically, of what hell would be. It's not the Dante's Inferno issue that we have. That doesn't happen till, hundreds of years later, right? But the point that Gehenna is the garbage pit outside of Jerusalem.
Right.
Okay? And everything that had no value was tossed out there. And it was burned because you just can't keep tossing stuff out. Eventually going to get burned. It also helped mask the smell. So it has all of these implications of what it is. Everything that is of no value goes to Gehenna. I don't want to be of no value. And you say your value is not here. And he's going, which is more important in this scenario? And if you think it's that important, and it is, it's better it end up in that pit. Let it be over there, but not here. And his community side is that, and I like where he said, is that it's there so the women are safe.
Right. And
this is a community level discussion. Because I get the individual people, and we have this thing in America. We have our, what goes on in your house is your house, and blah, 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 blah. And you're missing the impact of what that has on the community. And if Jesus is launching and telling you what his kingdom is going to be, a kingdom is a community. Hate to tell you. And in that, what are his community expectations? Yeah.
Definitely so. And I think God's heart has always been a place where he desires safety. You talked about, the community aspect of what this does. And we as men abdicate our role as protectors when we go down that road.
That's a great way to put it. I advocate my role. I vacate my throne to do that.
And that's not what we were designed for.
Right.
And when we live inconsistent with the way we were created,
Yeah.
then we will never find the joy
Right.
that God intended for us when we live consistently within the guidelines
Right.
that He gave us, but
Right.
even more than the guidelines, within the love centered
Right.
actions,
Right.
which bring us constantly back to Christ, and to our relationship with Him.
Right.
And so that's what He's trying to do is give us some behavioral and mental images that will help us understand the relational dynamic that He's been trying to emphasize all along.
Well, that's a good point. It's that this is in. Let's go practice this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go practice this, right? And then, it's funny, like in sports with me, with soccer, for instance, and I would watch the coaches training their kids. And then if somebody didn't do something or something right, then they go make them do laps in gym class when you're in school,
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things in Torah, for instance, that has, when you don't, here's your laps, right? Here's your atonement. Here's your sacrifice. Here's your go do this. If you've stolen, give it back, and 20%. If you've caused an unfair, like you've caused somebody's animal to die, replace it, and 20%. That kind of deal. Where it's not about what you can and can't do. It's about how do you practice stuff in community, and the examples of when to go do laps and when to not. And we covered it a couple weeks ago when we had Mackie talked about it in the love, everything hung on the two. I 100% agree. So then, and Jesus does, and we get this. And so people go, well, that's why the commandments don't count. And I go, that's interesting, because then I turned that very next week and played Rabbi Foreman's setup on the hidden text of the 10 Commandments. At the end, he says they both hang on love for your neighbor and love for God. And you go, I've heard that before. And you go, but we don't think that Jewish people think that way. In other words, we've been told that they don't think that way.
Yeah.
And I disagree. And I think that's part of the point that's saying in it, is that it is boiled down to everything. It's like a mobile, Mobile starts at the top, goes to here, and then everything breaks off from there. And that those mobile, you have to start with that.
Mm-hmm.
If not, it's just a one string. It starts out with this, and then everything else balances off of that. And I believe there's balance in all of that too. I believe there's balance in the God and balance in ours. Because God will say, you can't, my argument, you can't be in a monastery and not be active in community, because God says that has to be expressed.
Yeah.
Okay. On the other side, you can't love people and not acknowledge God. Because in that, you're going to go, yeah, I can love them, which means I can love as many women as I want to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that kind of stuff where covenant doesn't matter anymore. It's all in love, and you go. God says, my love has safety in it. My love has care for you. And the discussion that we get where He says, because Jesus says it, He says, love God with everything, heart, soul, mind. You're all in with God. Love your neighbor as yourself. And we really don't get into the selfish nature of loving yourself. And you go, are you so selfish that you're going to be selfish for somebody else?
Right. Which
draws a whole nother discussion, which we say it, and then we skip right over what that is. We just go, well, that just means you love a lot of people a lot. And you go, that's a children thought. What's the mature thought that goes with it?
Yeah.
Another time, another discussion. So we mentioned it before. What we'd like to do, folks, is Jimmy and I are looking at developing a series that will record and then post. Okay.
Right.
And we're debating the day just for fun. We'll put it out there. Don't stick it to us, because you'll stab us later. That we think like maybe on Tuesdays, and then Thursdays live with Dusty, and then on Tuesdays we do renew. So the renew side, I think, and Jimmy tell me if I speak out here, is that where we can talk about how this is personal, where we can talk about even more intimate life experiences and more intimate levels of what, and then go on further, because this subject, we talked about it, we get it. Mackie, we got the next series, we do that. I think maybe I drug my part 6 out. Maybe I could have not made it 4 parts of part 6.
Yeah.
But there were some points there I really wanted to talk about. Mackie brings up, but nonetheless, but in Renew, we can address some of these things at a more intimate. And we talk about CR. We can talk about these things that go, and where it's affected our lives and where it affects the people that we want to get. And then if we have other people on, and we mention them, we'll make sure that we have their permission to do that, because I want to honor and respect the other people. You and I, we can talk about ourselves, but if we want to engage at a more intimate level, sometimes want to make sure we have the safety to talk about other people, because again, being safe and fair to these people are important in those setups. And we have people in both our lives in that setup. So that's great. So yeah, it's time. So let's hit this real quick. So folks, the links to the video that we did, again, are in the description. DustyFeet.com. The live feed is there, and you can see what's going on with it. And then updates on Twitter. Like I said, if you were on Twitter, you knew that Jimmy was going to be on, because it said with Jim Wern, right? So then you'd already known the cat would have been out of the bag. So we'll hit this. I also have plans, and we'll see how this plays out, for another guest. It's not Reinhard Burr. We had him. I think I want to rebroadcast that show on Joyful Noise again, because that was the fallout with YouTube. I think I want to redo that again to just people that might have missed it. And it was so good. Reinhardt and Mandy were just wonderful in that. With that said, Joyful Noise, I have a guest that hopefully will be on it regularly. I'm excited. And once we shore up, you'll get his name, because it'll come out on Twitter and do that. But it's somebody else that I have coming up on that. And I'm excited for him. And I've known him for a number of years. And Jimmy grew up with him. So we have some connection and some time, and Jimmy knows. So maybe we'll have time, because we can have up to 4 people on this. So we might have the Brady Bunch scenario. We can drag in somebody else too and have some fun, just because it's entertaining. And we can bring that up. So next, where are we? So next week, I don't know what the next week topic's going to be, just because we're trying to figure some stuff out. So keep it up. It's not. So in 2 weeks, we'll go to part 8 of the Mackie thing. Go to Dusty Feet. The links will be there for part 8 and part 8's topic. That'll be there in 2 weeks. I don't know what we're going to have next week. So that said, Jimmy, again, thanks for being here. And I love these times where we get a chance to chat. And thanks for hanging with us out in the Dusty Feet. We'll see you next week. Have a blessed one.